Okay, now before we continue, I think it's really important to cover a couple fundamental concepts in React Router DOM. And to do so, I've built this very quick little application to demonstrate. All it is it has 3 pages. It has a home page, it has a topics page, and it has a topic ID page, right? A topic detail page. So 3 pages. Now, if we were to look at the code for this, we would see that it's just 3 functional components that render divs with the h1 telling us where we're at. And then it's all nested in routes inside of our app component, right? Our home route is the base slash path with the component homepage. Our topics route / topics, and then our topics detail is / topics / topic ID. Now, I know that this topic ID is kind of new, but we're going to cover that a little later. The first thing that I want us to look at is our homepage. The reason why is because one of the things that React Router DOM does for us is that any component that gets rendered by our route gets passed 3 arguments. The component that gets rendered is going to be the component we pass into our component property on our route. But what do those 3 properties look like? Well, let's log them out and see. Let's navigate to our homepage, and let's open up our DevTools. We'll see that the 3 props that we got passed were a history prop, a location, and a match. Now, the one I want to look at first is the match. So there's 4 things we get inside of our match. The first is the URL. The URL is just the URL of our component that it got rendered up to from the route. Now, what do I mean by this? So, if we were to look at our route for homepage, right? We learned that in our last lesson, without this exact keyword, any of our paths that start with a / and then anything after is also going to render our homepage. Because technically, if we were to navigate to / topics now, we are still matching the / portion of our URL, right? Which means that this route pattern is matching for our homepage. But if we were to look at our match, we actually see that the URL only matches up till the /, not the / topics. So that URL, no matter what we type, even if we were to navigate all the way here, and the URL property on our match will always only display the URL up until where it actually matched. Now, the path property is just the pattern that the route is looking to match. So the path property for our home page would be just the /. The path property for our topics list would just be / topics. And then for topic detail will be / topics / topic ID, which is what we see here. If we were to log this in each of these components, we will see that that is exactly what we'll show. So if we were to navigate to topics, we'll see in our topics that the path is just the / topics, which is the pattern that it's matching in the route. The isExact property is the one that's matching, that is only true if the entire URL matches the pattern. So while it's true for topics, because we're at / topics, it is false for our homepage, that despite it being rendered, it's not a perfect match because there's more of the URL than what is being matched by the route. Finally, the params property is an object of URL parameters. Now, what's a URL parameter? this is a URL parameter or a route parameter. When we write this in our path, we're saying that this route is waiting to match anything up to /topics and then / anything in this spot after. It can be a dynamically changing value, right? But that topic ID value, we want to be able to access as a parameter. Now, why is this important? If we were to navigate, so let's make our homepage exact, right? If we were to navigate to /topics/13, we actually now have access to that in our param, but let's log it first. So we'll see that in our match, we now have access to this topic ID 13. This is really useful because let's say in our topics detail, we wanted to show which topic we're looking at. Well, we would be able to access it by going topics.match.params.topicID. And if we wanted to use this ID to fetch a set of data related to this specific topic, right? It's good that in our topic detail page, we have access to that specific ID. So these parameters and doing it with this style allows our topic detail to populate itself if we needed it to from some kind of backend database based off of what specific detail it's at. And our topic detail now is aware of it. And usually we store this based on the URL parameter, right? Like if you look at many web applications, you'll see that if you are looking at one of your friends, for example, on Facebook, it'll say facebook.com/profile/ and then their either email or some unique identifier. So that is why this param pattern is so valuable. Now, the next thing is the history. Now, the history one is quite complicated, but the main thing I want to focus on is the push. So there's two ways to navigate in React Router DOM between our pages. Right now, we've just been dynamically updating the URL and getting to different pages. But in reality, the first one is the use of this link component. And the link component is a special component that React Router DOM gives us that lets us dynamically pass in this property of to, and then the string of where we want this link to take us to. And now if I go to home, I have this, what looks like a modified A link that will take me to this link. The only difference between this and our actual topics is that React, you got to remember, is a single page application, which means that it's not actually redirecting you and rebuilding the entire application every time the URL changes. We're really just hijacking the URL's position to determine with JavaScript what part of the DOM to take off and then what part of the DOM to replace, right? What component do we want to remount or mount? We're not trying to re-render the entire application, which was typically the case before we were building React applications, because React is an SPA, a single page application. So because of this, an A-link would actually force you to redirect and re-render the entire application, whereas using the React Router DOM link, we're just borrowing the URL to tell our application what to re-render. Now, the other way to do this type of navigation is using the history prop. So if instead of a link, we wanted to use a button, and in the on-click of our button, we would pass it a function that gets called whenever it gets clicked, and in this function, we would call the history prop, right? And we would tell it .push, and then the string where we want to go. So this is equivalent to using a link, but it gives us more dynamic access, right? We can dynamically, functionally control when we want this to work. So if, for example, we wanted to do this in a component did mount instead, right? We couldn't render a link in our component did mount because it's just a functional call, right? It's a method. We would use history.push. And we'll see that here, right? We have this topics button. We can just click it and go. So that's the main use that we get out of the history prop. The third prop that we have is the location. The location prop actually tells us where we are currently, like what is our application. The main thing I want us to focus on is the path name. Ignore these other properties. Let's just look at the path name. If we were to navigate, let's not make our homepage exact again. If we were to navigate to / like all these random sub-URLs, even though our homepage still matches, our location gives us the full path name of where we are currently. So this is useful because our application, our components, in some way can become aware of what the full URL looks like. Now, why would we use these properties? Well, the history one with the push, we understand. Location, we can see why we might need the path name at some point. But the main usage of match, beyond being inside of a specific topic detail, another useful thing about it is that this allows our components to build out a nested route structure. So what do I mean by nested routes? Well, let's say, for example, our topic detail page renders out a bunch of links, right? Or sorry, our topic list page renders out a bunch of links to a bunch of topic details. Well, we could have the link, and this link will go to a dynamically generated route. Let's say we want to say props.match.url, right? So we want to use the current URL. And then we want to say that we want to go to any topic detail, right? We want to go to, let's say, I want to go to 13, for example. And this one is to topic 13. And let's do this for a couple others, 17, 21. These are all just random. Well, now, it doesn't matter where our topics list is. It will always now be aware and know how to take us to that URL, right? Even if our topics list was at some obscure, long URL that it was not aware of, assuming that this was the case, right? Now we can change it in our route but now our topics list doesn't care. Let me just hide our homepage as well. Now our topics list doesn't care about anything regarding where our URL is from the point of where it matched. All it cares about is that I'm trying to render out or take you to different topics, right, from my path onwards. So this is how we can build out dynamic routing without our topics list being aware of the entire URL, right? And we can now reuse this topic list in multiple places as long as our topic, right, our topic detail, as long as we have the appropriate routes for it. So we can even replicate this with just the blog topics, but we can still use the same component for it. Because now, right, we have this topic list that works, but we also have this topic list that works. And they can take you to different topics. Essentially, we've compartmentalized and able to reuse our topic list and topic detail with dynamic routing. That's why this match property is useful. So we will see this a little bit more. So these are still very abstract concepts, but it's very valuable for us right now to know what they are. So armed with this knowledge, let's keep building our application.